Hi, I'm Thomas Blair,
And I'm Raph Koster.
and here for this month's episode of the Crowfall Q&A, March, trustee card. Raph Koster was in town, so we decided to have him on the show instead of Todd. And he's going to talk about social systems, which is going to be super exciting.
It'll be fascinating, I promise.
So, Raph, what would you say are the key elements in Crowfall social gameplay that is different from the current stuff we see in the marketplace right now?
Sure. Well, you know, MMOs these days, they've really kind of gotten extremely solo-friendly, right? Which also means extremely convenient for players. But that takes gameplay away from other kinds of players, too. So it's not that we dislike solo play. We love solo play. But we do think it's important that communities form, that people come together, work together in interesting ways. Not necessarily moment to moment, but also in ways like a famous crafter who makes the best longswords in the entire game should acquire a name, a reputation. You should come to know that person, rely on them being around, to supply them with goods, right? So it's not so much about necessarily giant sessions and knowing everybody and having to do 3-hour raid practices.
Sure.
But it is about, oh, I know that guy who lives around the corner, and I know the woman who supplies the best ammo and that kind of thing.
Sure, and I think I was that guy in Star Wars Galaxies on my server, for example. I ran a entire town based off of the sales from my blacksmith work, right? So I made lots of armor for everybody. Everybody knew to come to me. And my gameplay was all about refining, running my factories, crafting, and then stocking my vendors. So that way people knew that my shop was always stocked. So when they wanted armor, they knew where to come.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've lost sight of, I think, a bit in MMOs over the years, right, is everybody wants to, of course, play their class and do the thing that's a specialty. But the interesting thing about a massively multiplayer environment is that you have these kinds of interdependencies.
Right.
It's not that the PvPer is any worse at PvPing, but they also want to have the best supply lines. They want to have the best support networks, right? There's a lot of ways to be a badass. And, you know, a robber baron badass is still a badass.
Oh, yeah. It's just games haven't put that in years. So it's kind of exciting to be working on systems that are kind of going back to the roots of that style of gameplay. So, Raph, I've heard about soft touch and hard touch in social systems. Could you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Sure. You know, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that not all social contact is heavy.
Okay.
Right? We've gotten really used, especially in core MMO gameplay, to those long raid sessions, to the practicing, to the really tight-knit groups. That's kind of a high-touch thing. All players want to have high touch. We want to have our friends. We want to have our crew.
Yeah, people play with their friends.
Absolutely. That's not going to go away, of course. But it gets really intense if that's the only kind of contact there is, right?
Okay.
Sometimes you don't have 2 hours to play. Sometimes you only have 10 minutes.
Sure.
Sometimes you want to just pop in, pop out. Sometimes you want to just know that your friends are out there or that there are other people who are important to how you play, right? But you don't necessarily want to spend 2 hours with them, right?
Sure.
So the idea of light interdependence, things like, oh, a healer that I always practice with or that I always go into sieges with, that's high touch. I need to be there. We probably want to even practice maneuvers, that sort of thing. On the other hand, somebody like the crafter, somebody who repairs my goods, maybe a scout or explorer who's out there looking for the best locations for stuff, those might be lighter touch kinds of connections. You don't have to be in 2-hour sessions with them, right? So soft touch, that kind of interdependence, it still weaves a community together, right? It still lets you have this sensation that, oh, I'm operating in a larger context, 100 people, 200 people collaborating, working together, you know, the faction level, the guild level, that kind of thing. If you say all 100 people have to be on Friday at 8 p.m. in order for you to have fun, that, you know, that's a lot of commitment for a lot of people. That can be hard to schedule.
Sure.
So light touch interdependence. We've found over the years that in the games that have that, people actually form stronger bonds, better friendships, better teammates, more effective in destroying things.
Which is great for us all.
Yeah.
Over the years, we've seen MMOs kind of go towards that solo play, right? What has that cost us in terms of retention and the fact that we just let everybody do everything?
Well, you know, we found long ago that the more connections a player had to other players in the game, the more likely they were to stay. Just bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't need to be like best friend kind of connections.
It's just people you chat with.
Just people you chat with.
Right.
And so if these start vanishing because there aren't enough connections, you pretty soon find yourself logging into worlds where you don't know anybody.
Or an empty guild.
An empty guild, a deserted town. You know, you can't gather the people to go do your siege, right?
Sure.
So the more of these light connections you have, the more you're webbed into the fabric of the society of the game. And that means people tend to stick in the game longer. Period. For us, that means more retention. It means, you know, people stick in one game longer. That's good for us, obviously, as a business and all the rest.
Right, because we can make bigger content, right,
all of
whatever.
those things. But it's also great for players,
Yeah.
right? You know, there are players from the old school MMO games who still get together in person in retreats. They go to Vegas. They get together for parties.
I went to one of those last year.
Right? Yeah, right? You know, there's still guilds born in the late 90s that are doing this. And it's because of these kinds of connections. We want that kind of community in Crowfall. We want that kind of longevity. We want that kind of mutual loyalty, friendship. You know, that's what we want out of this. And we want the crows to flock together, man.
Sounds good. Okay, I'd like to thank Raph Koster for coming out for the March version of the Crowfall Q&A. And we will see you next month.